Welcome to this video tutorial about the quadratic function. So we've been looking at solving quadratic equations. We've been looking at what a quadratic function on a graph looks like. So we're going to have a look at something called the quadratic formula in this lesson. And it's to do with solving quadratic equations. So if you've been watching the other videos, you'll know that we could solve a quadratic equation by drawing a graph. And the good thing about that is that the solutions to the quadratic equation, as long as equal to 0, would be the roots here. So if I had the equation x squared minus 6x plus 5 equals 0, the solutions to that equation would be 1 and 5. We could also factorise sometimes. Now the point is that you can pretty well always get the solutions by drawing a graph, but you can't always get the solutions by factorising because not every quadratic expression factorises. Okay, when you can, it's quite straightforward and a good method to use. But what happens when you can't factorise? Or you're not confident about your factorising ability? Well, you can use another method, and this is what's called the quadratic formula. Okay, like all formulas, it's got lots of letters and numbers, and you plug in values and you shake it all about and you get the answers, and the answers in this case are the solutions to the equation. So what is the quadratic formula? Well, simply put, the quadratic formula looks like this. So first of all, we have to make sure our equation is in the form something x squared plus something something x plus c equals 0. So the standard form for a quadratic equation. And the formula says that x, the solution, is negative b, so the negative of the value of b, plus or minus the square root of this expression b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2 times a. So if we know values for a, b and c, all we need to do is plug them into this formula and it gives us the answers. Okay, it sounds easy. Why don't we do that all the time? And we can do, but there's a lot of little calculations to do and it's easy to get mixed up. So it's not always your number one option. If you can factorise, it's often a good it's a good plan to do so. It tends to be more accurate. So let's have a look at using it. Once you get the hang of it, it's the same all the time. So this example says solve the equation x squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0. Now take a look at it. You can't factorise that because we would have factors of 1 that add to 4 and there aren't any. And I've put the graph on it here, not so that we can nick the answers and not have to do it, but you notice here that the answers are not whole numbers. They'll be in between 0 and -1 and in between -3 and -4. We're going to have a decimal approximation, so that's why it's not helpful to factorise. Even with this, it's estimating it on a graph is not ideal. So let's use the quadratic formula. So what we do is we write down underneath where you've written the equation x squared plus 4x plus 1. I want you to write down values for a, which is 1. The number multiplier or the coefficient of the x squared term is a. The coefficient of the x term is positive 4 and this constant term is positive 1. So all you need to do is correctly identify a, b and c. And then we can write down the formula. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. And I'll just use there we go, a line there. It's always a good idea to use a ruler for this because it can be quite a long line. So what do we do? Substitute in, as we do with all formulas. So x is equal to negative b just means -1 lot of b, or whatever b is, you flip the sign of it. So it's going to be -4 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's 4 squared minus 4 times a times c. Now I tend to put the values for a and c in brackets because we're going to have to watch there might be 2 negative numbers to multiply together, but we'll see that in a moment. So 2 times a is just 2 lots of 1, which is 2. Okay, I'll put that in brackets to make sure you know that a is 1 there. So what have we got? We've got negative 4. And we're just going to do this little stage at a time. What's the number under the square root sign? 16 subtract 4 times 1 times 1. So it's minus 4 all over 2. And one other line of working, that's negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 12 all over 2. Okay. Now it is possible with surds work that you might be asked to keep this as an exact value, but most of the time you won't be, and the clue will be that you'll be told, usually, and if it is an exam question, to give your answer to 1 or 2 decimal places. Okay. Occasionally you could be asked to keep that as a surd and simplify it, but for the moment I'm going to use my calculator to approximate, or to get an approximation for this. So what we're saying is the fact that we know there's 2 answers. Where do the 2 answers come from? We can say that x is negative 4 minus root 12 over 2. Or we can say that x is negative 4 plus root 12 over 2. And that's where our 2 answers come from. You rewrite it, one with a minus and one with a plus. And then you can take your calculator and work the answer out. There's a little warning about using your calculator. When you put negative 4 minus the square root of 12, press the equal sign at the end of that line. So, because if you just press divide by 2 after it, it'll only divide the root 12 by 2. Okay, either that or put brackets round the top line in your calculator, and you should get negative. Oh, hang on a minute, I'll double check that. Do you know what? That's actually not. Oh, I think I've got my graph wrong here. It looks like, I'll do that again. Negative 4 minus root 12. Yeah, that graph is. Oh, no, hang on. That's just I haven't done my calculation right. I think. You see, I didn't do the divided by 2. I was too busy talking. Negative 3.732 and so on. So you might be asked to round it to a particular value, in which case do what you're told. I'll round it to 1 decimal place, negative 3.7. Okay, and the other one is negative 4. Negative 4 plus the square root of 12 equals divided by 2. And that's going to be negative 0.267 and so on, which is going to be negative 0.3 to 1 decimal place. So we can say here, just as we did with our factorising, write them nicely. Solutions, x equals negative 3.7 or x equals negative 0.3. And I've put the graph up there. It is correct. We can see, we knew that one answer was going to be between 0 and negative 1, and then between negative 3 and negative 4, and we can see indeed that's the case. Okay, so that's us using the quadratic formula to solve an example. I'll put another one up, and if you want to pause it and try it yourself, I'll put the graph up there just to see if you've got, you get a ballpark figure. But if you want to try it ahead of me, pause it and then start it off, because I'm going to go over it now. So in this one here, y equals 3x squared plus 2x minus 4, we can write down that a is positive 3, b is positive 2, and c is negative 4. So if we're writing down the quadratic formula, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Then that's it there. And we're going to substitute in for, remember, negative b is b multiplied by negative 1, or just whatever b is with the sign flipped. It's going to be negative 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared is 4 minus 4 times 3 times negative 4. This is one of the cases where you have to watch out because of that other negative sign. Okay, I'll talk about that in a moment. 2 times a is on the bottom, so that's 2 times 3. So, what are we looking out for? We've got negative 2 plus or minus. Now, 4, And then we've got, look at this, it's negative 4 times 3 is negative 12 times negative 4. So 12 fours are 48, but crucially, that becomes a plus sign because there's two negative numbers multiplying. So be really careful about whether in the end you're adding or subtracting those three numbers. Okay? So we'll simplify that. Just one more step. That's negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 52 all over 6. Now's the point where we split it up. And we say x is equal to negative 2 minus root 52 all over 6. Or x is root 2 plus, so negative 2 plus root 52 over 6. Use your calculator to work out the answers. Negative 2 minus root 52 equals, okay, or put brackets on your calculator, divided by 6, and we get negative 1.5. I'm going to round it to 2 decimal places this time, just because you could be asked to round it to any, usually 1 or 2. And for the other one, we get negative 2 plus root 52 equals, divided by 6, and we get positive 0.868, which is going to be 0.87. Double check on the graph. You won't normally have a graph to check with, but by all means, if you're practicing, use something like Desmos. If you can learn how to use it, it's a really good, useful tool to check that you've got it right. We're looking for an answer just less than 1, yep, and an answer just halfway between negative 1 and negative 2, yep, I've got my solutions correct. Okay, so we can say that solutions are x equals negative 1.54, x equals 0.87. Good. And one last one I want to throw in here. Solve the equation 2x squared minus 3x plus 5 equals 0. So we're saying here that a is 2. I haven't got a graph, you'll notice, because there's a particular reason for that. And we've got values for a, b and c. So let's write out the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of, there is a song about this, by the way, which I often sing to my students. I'm not going to do it just now, but you can always ask and I might do it. What have we got? Negative b, well, negative 3 with the sign flipped as positive 3. Plus or minus the square root of, now b squared, negative 3 squared is positive 9. I tend to write that one down by inspection, although you could write brackets negative 3 squared. Negative 3 squared is positive 9 minus 4 times 2 times 5. And all over 2 times 2 is 4. I'm just going to write that down. And this is the next part here. So let's check. Let's work on the number under the square root. We've got 9 minus, now 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 5s are 40. There's only one negative sign, so it is minus 40 all over 4. And you get to the point of just working out the one number. Okay? Are you noticing what's about to happen here? 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 31 over 4. Now, we have a major problem here because you can't get the square root of a negative number. Try it on your calculator. There isn't a number multiplied by itself gives us negative 31. In other words, because that doesn't exist, there we can say that there are no solutions. So we found out one of our quadratic equations, you could have normally there's 2 solutions. Sometimes you get 1, but there are some situations where there aren't any solutions. There are no numbers that if you put it into the expression 2x squared minus 3x plus 5, that the answer is 0. What does that mean? What does that actually mean in graphical terms? Well, we know that usually there are 2 solutions. In other words, there are 2 points where the curve cuts the x-axis. There's 2 solutions. Sometimes there are only 1, and that would mean that the curve might be, depending on whether it's coming up or down, as in it's just going to touch the x-axis at 1 point. What's happening here is our curve, actually the curve doesn't come down to the x-axis at all. The solutions, of course, are how many times does the curve cut the x-axis, and all this it means for this equation is that the curve y equals 2x squared minus 3x plus 5 doesn't touch the x-axis at all. Okay, that's what the connection between the equation having no solutions and the picture of the curve. Okay, so hopefully that's helped you start the quadratic formula. Go away and practice it, and then you can keep working on your quadratic function studies.